Last week I did a live event about Life's Potluck Buffet, and you can check it out in the community tab of YouTube here if you want to watch it. And I got a lot of questions before and after about being siloed in life, being stuck inside our phones and our digital lives in a way that is very isolating. And people are feeling that. And that's clear from many conversations I had after the live show. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about literal silos and metaphorical silos. And we're going to ask the cards how we could break out of our individual silos. I'm John Paulus, and you're listening to Life's Potluck Buffet only on YouTube. If you've been enjoying these episodes of Life's Potluck Buffet, please subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, thank you, and thank you for listening. And if you use a Brave browser, you can contribute basic attention tokens to Life's Potluck Buffet with John Paulus by clicking on that little triangular thing with the orange and purple and blue in it on your Brave browser's browser bar. That's a lot of alliteration. And you can, there'll be a button there. So thank you so much for your support, and thank you all for listening. All right, now let's talk silos. Where shall we begin? Let's start in the 17th century, because if you look up the word silo, and you want to know where it comes from, most English language dictionaries are going to say just Spanish. And that is where it's pretty clear, looking at the history of it, that that's where the English language has ultimately borrowed the word from, is the Spanish word silo, and also Spanish words like ensilar, which mean to store in a pit originally that was covered at some point, and so to store stuff in, usually grains or grasses or products of the earth in such a pit was in Spanish to ensilo or ensilar was the verb, or is the verb. And that whole process and that whole technique and popularity of the Spanish methods of doing that took hold in first France. Apparently a Monsieur Tourneau, who was a person who lived near the banks of the Seine outside of Paris in a place called Saint-Ouen. And the French did a lot of experiments involving ensilage and siloing and all of this in the 19th century. And so that's when it became kind of popular in the circles of people who write about such things and agricultural treatises and so forth in France and in England and the United States and so forth. And all of this became a very big interest. The idea of ensiloing things, of digging a pit. In the Spanish case, by the way, the pit was apparently 14 feet down, where you put the stuff in. This is as old as the hills, so to speak, around the world, where people buried crops that they had grown, or grasses or grains or fodder for animals, in pits to either preserve them or to ferment them. That's the thing about the silo. I think I said ferment them. Yeah, I don't mean to make beer or something. I mean to acidify, say fodder, for example, to preserve it and have it for later for your the animals that you're feeding. So that's those big silos that when you think of stereotypical silos that you might see like in pictures, when you type in the word silo. A lot of those are for feed, for animal feed. Then in there, grasses or grains, or, well, grains, Anyway, we won't get into detail of grasses and grades. That's for another day. So siloing has been important around the world in some form or another forever, because basically it's just a very human way to store and preserve things that you have grown. Nowadays, silos are used for a lot of different things. Any bulk materials you can see in a silo. Silos are very common just for storing bulk things, not just the kind of grains and grasses and so forth that traditionally go in silos. But where did that Spanish word silo come from? Well, looking into the 17th century dictionaries of Castellano, the Castilian language, which the language of Castile, which we would recognize today as being Espanol, being Spanish. And that's because that particular language became, well, for various reasons, and we won't go all into the history here, became the dominant language in the region. It's a little bit like how the Florentine version of Romance language became the kind of basis of standard Italian. And that's when we talk about Italiano, we're talking about something that's ultimately derived from the language that was spoken in say Florence and those kinds of places, that area. Again, that is for another day, because same different complications, but okay, back to silo. So the people writing those dictionaries of the Castilian language in the 17th century thought that it came from either places that are in Asia Minor, in antiquity, and thought that maybe like places like Cappadocia, which is in modern day Turkey, and the similar kind of places, but they also understood that they came also that there was some tradition in Spain, especially the parts of Spain that were closer to Rome. I only say that because the Latin has to figure out words, which is this the Spain that's further away from Rome or the closer parts of Spain? And so that gives you a sense that those and so they thought that it was from something from those languages, because Roman authors wrote about how that's what they called it in the area. There's also a Greek word for a kind of pit like this. Then that word is siros, but it isn't a Greek word. It actually comes from, and people think that maybe that the word that the Roman authors are talking about, that the Castilian linguists are talking about in the 17th century, that they're talking about that it's ultimately from this Greek word, siros, which I say Greek word only because they knew it in Greek language. That's how they knew the word, but it's not a Greek word. It's a word from the languages of the Aegean that existed long before the arrival of people who spoke languages that we would now consider part of those new European languages, like, well, Spanish, or, the Latin that it ultimately mostly derives from. And those languages were the original indigenous languages of the Aegean, and the European languages were newcomers at some point. And that's something we're thinking about in terms of silos, because there's a kind of outside of the box hypothesis that the word silo in Spanish actually comes from one of these languages that is indigenous to what is now called Europe. And that language, in English, we call it the Basque language. In Basque, it's Euskara is the language. I hope I pronounced it right. If you're a Euskara speaker, let me know if I got that right. There's the SK has a little bit of sh sound to it, so I was trying to get that in there. That's what I hear when the speakers of that language say the language, so I tried to work that in there. But anyway, if you're a speaker of that language, then let me know. But that language is the really the last known spoken language that's indigenous to what we would call the Iberian Peninsula, and in fact, all of Europe, because all of the languages that are the main languages of all of the countries of Europe are adopted from a language family that comes further from the east that is called Indo-European. And so the word in Basque, zulo, which means a hole or one of these kind of silo-like things that you might put stuff in, like grains, that is a possible etymology for the word silo in Spanish, and therefore a possible etymology of the word period. It's interesting that the two possible candidates for the word silo are both languages indigenous to the lands that are now part of European countries, because the technology already existed when people speaking languages in the Indo-European language family first showed up in those places. After all, the silo is a very widespread human technology that is very useful and important to human beings and animals that human beings feed. But somehow in the 20th and 21st century, the idea of the silo became something negative, because the silo ended up being this lone thing in the middle of a vast field that had no contact with any other of its silo colleagues, and therefore just could only keep on repeating the same ways and the same information over and over again. Now, there might not be a way to change that on an organizational-wide level for each one of us as an individual, but we can think about ourselves and how we can break out of our own silo and see our worlds in a new way. So let's ask the cards how to do this. Yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards, tell us somethings. Better not be passions or for hobbies. It's card 29. Something you thought was beyond you is actually within your capabilities. Oh, this is a great card for thinking about how to break out of these silos. Once we realize that our wildest dreams are hardly the stuff other people's dreams are made of, we can start to accept that they are not fantasies, but accurate predictions of our futures. So take that first step right now by identifying something you think is totally beyond your reach, way beyond the silo, somewhere out there in that wide world. What is it? Now, plan the next step to achieving it. So give that a shot, break out of your own silo today, and I'll see you tomorrow outside our silos on Life's Potluck Buffet.